Today we're going to solve the mystery of these mysterious letters. If you haven't seen the first part where I opened up letters 1 and 2, there's going to be a link in the description. Otherwise, we're going to continue on with letter 3. So here we have letter 3. This time I am going to use a computer. It's a little bit easier for me to read, probably easier for you guys to follow along. But before we go over the new contents, maybe I can do a little bit of a review. So here's my notes. Of course, we have a list of our characters / suspects. First, we have Sir Henry and Lady Anne Bellamy. They are married and they are the owners of Oakvale Manor. They're the ones who wrote the letters to us to report the missing reliquary. And reliquary, again, is just a fancy container to hold a relic. In this case, it is a finger. Next, we have the two maids, Flora and Jane. Then we have the two footmen, Jarvis and Edward, who were guarding the door to the chapel where the reliquary was before it was stolen. We have Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, the butler and the cook. We have the Mastiff dog, Cato. And then we have the page boy, Teddy. So of course, this case is about the missing reliquary. It went missing sometime in the night of July 3rd into the morning of the next day. It was last seen at the chapel where they were going to display it for people to view. It was going to be some type of fundraiser event. The only evidence that was left behind was a broken window that was the size of a small dinner plate, and it was also 17 feet above the ground. So it's highly likely that a human was not able to fit through the window, and they would also have to deal with being 17 feet off the ground. In letter 2, we saw a letter from Inspector Andrew Mercer, and there was a part where Teddy the page boy ran into the chapel and ended up finding a magpie feather. I thought it was pretty significant because it goes into my first theory, which is that the only way the glass could have been broken is that a bird flew through the glass and possibly snatched the reliquary, because it's small enough for the bird to grab. It's actually just the size of, I think, of index finger. But the question remains that who could train a bird to do that? Because I don't think a bird would just do that on its own. And possibly it has to retrieve it, right? And bring it back somewhere. Who knows? A bird could have been acting on its own. As far as motives, the strongest one is that Henry has a lot to gain if it went missing because he could collect on the insurance money. Anyone else can also have a motive for money, but the inspector did mention that it might be hard to sell unless they have like a black market back then. I don't know. And finally, we have some of the details for a timeline / people's alibis. Flora claimed that she went to bed at 10 p.m., but Mr. Jenkins says that he saw her come in at 11 p.m. from outside. So that's one of the clear, distinct testimonies where one person is telling the truth and one is lying. Now, I thought Mr. Jenkins doesn't really have a motive to lie about this, whereas Flora does. So it's more likely that Flora's lying about it, but she could be lying about it for other reasons. It might not be related to the missing reliquary. Jane just claims that she retired early and slept all night. Mrs. Jenkins claims she was reading by a fire and kind of dozed off until 11 p.m., while Mr. Jenkins says he was roaming the house as usual and then retired also around 11 p.m. Teddy, the page boy, was in the kitchen helping out with something, and then he said that he also left when Mr. Jenkins retired. Then we have Jarvis and Edward, who were guarding the only door to the chapel. Jarvis admitted that at some point in the night, he snuck away to get some alcohol. And then after Jarvis left, at some point, Edward fell asleep in front of the door with the dog Cato by his side. So that's it for the review. I think there might be some things that I didn't take note of that I might have said in the last video. If so, hopefully it will come back to memory. But for now, let's go on to the contents of letter 3. So in the letter 3 envelope, there were 3 documents front and back, and it seems to be a letter from John H. Watson. So this was written on the 7th of July. The night where it happened was the 3rd until the 4th in the morning. Dear Holmes, I hope Amsterdam fares well. I am writing to you from a delightfully snug inn in Tilford. So he's writing this to Sherlock, not to us, because some of these letters are addressed to us as an esteemed detective. It is the end of a tiresome day, and I have made the inquiries you requested. I had anticipated finding a resolution for Sir Bellamy by now, but as I look over my notes, the odd theft only continues to perplex me. My findings today suggest that Sir Bellamy is entangled in something greater than the case of his missing relic, that is. So I forgot something probably I should review were the 3 objectives that we received from the first letter. So this is in the first letter from Watson. The first one is, by what means did Saint's finger make its departure from the confines of the Oakvale Chapel, and who might have been so audacious to abscond with it? Number 2, in what undisclosed location might the sacred reliquary now lie? And lastly, cursed or not, is Sir Henry's life, as he claims, in peril? So when it says cursed or not, is because there was this whole thing about the finger being cursed, or the fact that he lost it is that he's now cursed. One of the maids believes the same thing. The page boy is kind of scared also. So I don't know how significant the cursed finger is as far as the case goes. At least Sir Henry either believes it's true or he could be lying about it for some reason. One being as a cover story because he wants to get the insurance money. I think the maid and the page boy are genuinely afraid, but we'll see. So when it says something greater, I don't know if he's referring to all this supernatural stuff, or maybe there's another whole part of this mystery that we don't know yet. So something greater than the case of his missing relic, that is. Yet I am utterly unable to perceive what that something might be. Please review my observations, which I will provide below as soon as you have the opportunity. Yesterday, 6th of July, I arrived in the village near 7 in the morning and was met with the horse and hare by Inspector Mercer. He is a fine young man of perhaps 30 years, notably tall and broad-shouldered, with a bristling mustache and a look of authority on his face. Two of the inn's serving girls struggled to avert their gazes from him as he spoke to me. It's a really good looking dude, I guess. Once they saw I had noticed their staring, they giggled and rushed away with their bundles of linens. He seemed not to notice as he led me to a carriage outside, in which we proceeded to Oakvale Manor. As we rode, the inspector reviewed the facts of the Bellamy case. I asked if he had any theories. He said he believes the husband to be the villain in the affair. The old scoundrel blames her for it all. He is determined to have his own wife arrested. Oh yeah, that's another thing I forgot to mention, is that he is 100% blaming his wife. There's really no evidence other than he's just saying that she did it to try to kill him. I played the fool. Why? Mercer leaned forward in the landau, dropping his voice so the driver would not hear him. I don't know if I said that word correctly. They have been married for 3 years and have no children. Sir Bellamy is the last of his line, almost 65 years of age, and he is obsessed that he still might have an heir. It's plain as a pikestaff. I nodded along and began to take note. He wants grounds to marry again before it's too late. My guess is he conspired with one of the footmen, the one named Jarvis. You'll meet him. Shifty fellow, though I still don't see how they managed it. Okay, so I guess this could be another motive. It's like two birds with one stone. You solve money problems and also potential heir. This must mean that Lady Anne cannot have children, or they're struggling to have children. I don't think there was a mention of that. Your theory appears to lack a foundation of evidence, I cautioned, and Mercer spoke with passion. Mark my words, the relic will turn up of its own accord in due time, if he hasn't already disposed of it. Consider this. Bellamy could have staged a robbery and had the saint's finger hidden, then started casting doubt on Annie. With evidence of a clamor, he can justify the divorce regardless of her guilt in the matter, and then claim an insurance settlement on the confounded thing. He'll make off with a new fortune. The reprobate must believe he's brilliant. The reprobate? I'm guessing this is not a nice term. In the last minutes of our ride, Mercer continued to express his certainty that it was without a doubt the footman who helped Sir Bellamy stage the relic's theft, and that, though they might intend to destroy the object, it must still be hidden somewhere on the property. The inspector planned to conduct a more thorough search of Oakvale upon our arrival. Having now done the same, I have much to consider. Does that make sense? Because Watson must be writing to us after he's already been there and done his own investigation. Oakvale is the sad wreckage of a once majestic home. It reflects its master, bent, crumbling, with windows either bored or broken like jagged teeth in an aged mouth. At the door, we were greeted by Sir Bellamy's creased face, mottled with liver pots. His shabby black coat dragged along the floor behind him and had several tears across one sleeve. Still, I wager it is worth more than any of my own garments. His cough, rather aggressive, was immediate evidence of a congestion in his lungs, but I had to do little guesswork, for once he learned I was a medical man, he readily agreed to an examination. My prognosis? Holmes, Sir Bellamy is desperately ill and is convinced in every fiber of his being that he is cursed. Every attempt at questioning the man inevitably became discussion of the relic and the effects its absence would have on him and those around him. Thankfully, his rants about efforts cursed were quickly interrupted by the regal Lady Bellamy's arrival. She is slender, with a wreath of silver gilt hair, and welcomed us in a low, measured voice as she emerged from a side chamber. She greeted the inspector first, her hand resting rather long within his grasp. One could have seen the affection between them even in the dark. Well, it's also to note that the inspector said they were childhood friends, or, he knew her all her life or something. So maybe there could be something there? I don't know. When she had taken a seat, I explained to Lady Bellamy that I was visiting on your behalf, on Sherlock's behalf, and that I would be lending a hand to the inspector. Let them get to work then, Henry, was her smiling response. Thus they agreed to leave me to my own devices, and I quickly began the tasks you outlined for me. I went first to the chapel. The narrow chamber was dim, so before proceeding, I stepped back outside to fetch a candle. The Bellamy's page boy, fortunately, was within sight, sharing his luncheon with the birds and chuckling at their antics, so I sent him off in search of a light. So there's more birds. You need to follow them and see if he can find the finger. He returned with a lantern, and as he handed it off, he pulled a small device from his pocket, a heavy rock, lodestone it seemed, bound to an old set of knitting needles. What? He demonstrated how he had been using the detecting device to search Oakville for any metal objects that might have been used in the commission of a crime. Is he talking about like magnets or something? Nothing so far, he said, almost to himself, as he began to wander the chapel with it. As I approached the tapestry on one side, he asked, "What about there, sir?" drawing my attention to it. "Someone could have hidden behind the tapestry. It's enormous." "Yes, but how would they have departed without anybody taking notice?" came my rebuttal. The lad shrugged. "I heard Lady Bellamy fainted. Isn't that a typical ruse?" I was amused by his insight. "You really would like to earn that reward." His face brightened. "Well then, keep your eyes open and report anything you learn to Inspector Mercer or me. Agreed?" The page boy nodded and gave a snappy salute. "Aye, sir. Name's Teddy. I certainly will." And he was off with his device and a small pad of paper in hand. The boy is clever. Indeed, I thought, what an excellent Baker Street irregular he would make. Nevertheless, as I examined the chapel and let the weight of its years soak in, I realized the room was too small to support his theory. Had a thief been concealing themselves behind a tapestry, waiting to flee with the relic, they would have failed to leave the cramped chamber unnoticed. I also tested the walls and floors, stomping around vigorously, but found no unseen passages. Neither is there a vault below the floor, nor are there attic chambers above the ceiling. Still, I did notice something peculiar while strolling about the chapel. High on the wall outside, in the moss below the broken window, were several pockmarks. Pockmarks? Is that like from birds? When I examined them through a glass on a ladder, I noticed bits of yellow mixed into the stone's green. Okay, so I think this is a very important detail. Just make sure you get a note of this. How significant that is, I cannot say. And of course, the search for footprints was futile because the residents had trampled about the grounds in their preceding investigations. It was also raining that night, so I don't know how well it would retain footprints anyways. From the chapel, I made my way to the servants' quarters so that I could speak with the remaining staff. I found the quarters empty, but was promptly redirected to the kitchen by Lady Bellamy. There I found the butler, Mr. Jenkins, and his wife, Lydia. Ooh, we have a first name. And his wife, Lydia, the cook. She prepared a stew with a surprisingly upright posture and neatly pinned gray hair, while her husband, an exceedingly corpulent man verging on deafness, polished glasses. I don't think I mentioned this before, but would his deafness have anything to play into what happened? Deafness has nothing to do with forgetfulness. I think the claim is just that Flora is saying he's forgetful. She's saying, oh, the night that you saw me come in wasn't actually that night. It was before, like a previous week or something. They worked loudly, and unlike most of the others, were disinterested in my presence. The elderly pair had little to say to me, though the butler complained of his missing braces. That's right. That's another thing I didn't put in my notes, that he lost his braces, and I believe this is the one where it helps support your legs. We've all got our own relics. I only had 2 pairs of braces, which makes them just about as valuable as any ancient artifact. Who's going to investigate my theft? At that point, his wife delivered a light but firm tap to the back of his head with a wooden spoon. Old fool, she said, and offered her apologies for his sense of humor. I left them to their quarreling and traveled to the parlor after this, where I questioned the Bellamy's maids, Flora and Jane. They seemed eager to speak with me when I introduced myself. When asked about their recollection of the 3rd of July, they told me that they had found the chapel dirty and stale before preparing it for the relic's placement. They swept up plenty of dirt and dust, polished the newly installed candelabra, beat out the tapestry, and knocked down cobwebs. After allowing them each to deliver their accounts of the day, I asked them about their evenings, and they agreed it had been an uneventful night. I posed another question, recalling the details provided by Inspector Mercer. What of the other days last week? Anything eventful? Jane answered excitedly. We celebrated Jarvis's birthday. We were out on the lawn playing games all day on the 1st. Thank heavens Mrs. Jenkins reminded us to stow away the croquet mallets all before we left for the village. Isn't that right, Flora? Flora laughed sheepishly as the tall maid went on. So there was some descriptions of the maids, and Jane is apparently like 6 feet tall with like red hair. So they always refer to her as the tall one or the tall maid. So I know why Flora's laughing, because this has to do with her alibi. There was lots of rain that night too. I wrote this all down and thanked the two for speaking with me. So I thought Watson was going to say something, but this clearly contradicts what Flora was saying. So I think we should go back to that part where Mr. Jenkins is talking about what he saw when Flora came in, and then also Flora's excuse for that. So this is what Mr. Jenkins was saying. This is the letter from the inspector. When I was making myself tea just after retiring, it must have been 11. I was in the kitchen and I suddenly heard a dreadful plop, plop, plop. So I armed myself with the biggest ladle I could find and poked my head out the door. Mrs. Jenkins held onto his arm as he spoke. Lo and behold, Flora, drenched but oddly happy, clutching a croquet ball in one hand and a small rag in the other. Okay, so Mr. Jenkins says that he saw her holding a croquet ball. Is it croquet or croquet? I think croquet, right? I think I'm just going to say croquet. Okay, so is it in the same letter? So here we have Flora's response when the investigator asks her about what Mr. Jenkins said. She said, he must be thinking of a different day is all. It rained a lot last week, and see, there was one day the staff had been playing games on the lawn. You can ask him. And I realized very late that we had left some things outdoors. So Flora told the inspector that they left things outdoors, whereas Jane here is saying they brought everything in. But actually, it might check out because Mr. Jenkins said he saw her with a ball, while Jane says that they got all the mallets. This part could be a little bit odd too, where she is trying to emphasize that it rained because it has to match her story that she came in drenched that night. But we'll see, and let's just keep going. So Watson says, I wrote this all down and thanked the two for speaking with me. I then asked Jane to inform Sir Bellamy that I'd hoped to speak with him before departing. In that time, I questioned Flora about the ball, which Mr. Jenkins, to Inspector Mercer, had reported seeing in her hands. Yes, this is what I just pointed out, that it was a ball. Not 2 seconds passed before the girl burst into tears. I have it here. It was me who broke the window. I lied to the inspector. Oh. But then, how did you get the ball back? Does that also explain the yellow? Oh, okay, I should just keep reading. So I lied to the inspector, Flora cried, lifting the ball from a sewing basket on the parlor floor. It was wooden, heavy, and brightly painted with a yellow and white stripe. But it's nothing to do with the relic. I swear it. I'd never, honest. Again, if she broke the window with the ball, so I'm guessing it didn't go through, it just broke from the outside. And then maybe the bird didn't have to break the window. Maybe it just flew in the already broken window, which I guess I didn't think about, how a bird can fly through a window, break it without getting injured, leaving no blood or anything behind, and then come back out. The night before the saint's finger went missing, I met Jarvis in a small clearing behind the chapel. I also had this theory. So, this is what I meant when I said there could be another reason why she's lying or covering something up. And I figured both she and Jarvis could have been unaccounted for that night. So, it could have been a possibility that they've been meeting up. And here we have it. She's saying, I met Jarvis in a small clearing behind the chapel. He had griped that it would be a dreadfully boring night and that Eddie would be at their post anyways, so I agreed to keep him company for a short time that evening. She paused to wipe her tears. I took him sweets, and I am ashamed to admit, some of the brandy that Mrs. Jenkins keeps in the kitchen. We spent some time talking as we indulged ourselves, and that was when we, or rather I, seemed to have broken the window. Oh, so she doesn't remember? Jarvis is fond of sporting, see, and I fancy croquet. So he has been teaching me all about it, helping me develop a proper swing. We often practice in the woods nearby, and so we started keeping one of the spare mallets and several balls in the clearing behind the chapel. Flora scratched the top of her hand as she spoke. That night, while we were chatting, he began to boast as he always does, and the brandy, I believe, convinced me it would be humorous to try putting him to shame. So I said, watch, as this small maid hits the ball so far that you will never find it. And I swung the mallet, and off the ball went. We both began to laugh afterwards, and I forgot about it until leaving the clearing some 15 minutes later. She fell silent. What then? I asked, and after a short breath, she went on. Having grown tired of the rain, I left Jarvis to enjoy the rest of his sweets and made my way to the servants' quarters. It was as I walked towards the chapel that I heard leaves rustling, louder and louder. Fortunately, it was no spirit or specter, only young Teddy. However, he was holding the croquet ball in his hands and came bearing unfortunate news. My aimless swing had launched the ball at the chapel window and broke it. He told me he wouldn't say a word if I swore not to tell anyone that he'd been out late in the rain. Wait, so Teddy said he was in the kitchen helping out until about 11. But Mr. Jenkins says that he saw her come back at 11. So I don't know, this timeline is not matching up for me. Maybe I just need to keep reading. I was considering confessing to Lady Bellamy until the saint's finger went missing and I saw Sir Bellamy so angry. Please understand, Dr. Watson, I didn't want anybody to think I had something to do with that. Are you going to tell the inspector? Flora sighed, tears forming anew. I thanked her for her honesty and told her that I would have to inform Sir Bellamy eventually, but that I still had several matters to investigate. A moment later, Jane finally returned to announce that Sir Bellamy is in his study. He says if you wish to speak with him, that you should now do so now before his bath. I replied in the affirmative and followed her to his study. There I said my farewell to the furious man after explaining to him that I would need time to consult with you. You meaning Sherlock? He is impatient, which should not come as a surprise. I am growing old, doctor, and my finances have indeed suffered these years, he said to me. But this is a great leap towards my demise, and those around me do not seem bothered in the least. It's Anne's fault the object went missing in the first place, and the staff is only concerned with themselves. He stopped a cough before adding, you know, one of the footmen has charged himself with convincing them they deserve more money from me. That battle has been the only thing on their minds for the past 2 weeks. The whole lot of them, even the maids and the page boy to whom I am providing a cottage on my property, free of charge, came asking for an adjustment to their wages. And still they say I am the mad one, and I say no, Jane, and no, Flora, and no, Eddie and Teddy. Thus ended my conversation with Sir Bellamy and the inspection of Oakville Manor and its grounds, though I uncovered another couple of details upon my exit from the manor and after my subsequent return to the Horse and Hare. The Horse and Hare is the inn, I think, that he's writing from or was staying at. Leaving Oakville, I noticed a torn sheet of paper being blown repeatedly by the wind against the foot of a garden statue. It appeared to be childish drawings from afar, but on closer inspection, I realized there were some words written across the side. I will include a duplicate of the sheet of paper for you in this letter. Beyond that, I must report another alarming bit of information, which I learned no more than 15 minutes ago from Inspector Mercer. He came to the room at the inn, and as I was writing the first pages of this missive and enjoying a plate of roast duck. "Confound that man," he said, pounding on my door. I opened it and demanded he explain himself. Why, Sir Bellamy, he attempted to lock his wife in a bedchamber after I wouldn't shackle her. He's accusing her of attempted murder. I asked, on what evidence? These were his words. After you left Oakville, about an hour ago, a messenger arrived from me from the chemist. The fool blurted out his message in Sir Bellamy's presence. It seems the bottle I had asked Dr. Withern to examine contained not only Bellamy's sarsaparilla, but a small percentage of laudanum, which has never been prescribed for him. He believes that Annie added the drug to his tonic. I told him I could not imprison her solely because of that discovery, and he was not keen to hear that. I've asked the butler and his wife to call on me should things sour further, and I figured you should know. So I think since he's been taking this tonic or whatever it is, he hasn't been feeling well. So they did suspect something was in there, and apparently there is. The inspector seemed at wit's end, and it was clear to me that he believes Lady Bellamy to be blameless in this affair. I mean, he is a bit biased because they grew up, they're like childhood friends. There could be a little something more going on. For my part, I will visit Oakville again this evening to ensure all is well, but only after sending this letter by special messenger, for I remain baffled by the pieces of this puzzle. Please help me set things right for the Bellamy's, Holmes. Your friend, Watson. P.S. On the reverse of this page, you will find my recreation of the drawings and writing I found leaving Oakville. All right, so here's the drawings. There are some birds here. This looks like a ship and an octopus, a pirate, some fish, another sailboat. So it did mention in an earlier letter that the page boy would sometimes sit on rocks, or he at one point was sitting on rocks drawing. So these could be his drawings. But for the writing, let's see. One berry, is it berry or burge? Clap, caw. Two berries. Ort, whistle, fly. Two claps, hop, whistle, fetch. Okay. So immediately, this is coming to my original theory that someone is training birds, right? Because these look like commands, and then you do something to make them fly, to make them hop, and this, I don't know if this means fetch. But do we have handwriting? I don't think, or signatures? I don't know how we can tell who wrote this, unless we know because of the boy who's drawing. Is this also the boy's handwriting? Okay, let me go find the part about the page boy drawing stuff. Okay, finally, I found it. So after he has this conversation, the page boy was in the chapel and he came out and he found a feather, right? That's where I first suspected some birds might be involved. He says right here, I told the boy to run along and he skipped away to a boulder between the house and chapel where he sat and remained scribbling on a pad. I don't know why I remembered that, but it was a very distinct detail about him doing something that I wouldn't think, like, why is he scribbling on a pad? So anyways, it's a boulder between the house and chapel. So let's see if that lines up with where Watson found this. Here it says, against the foot of a garden statue. Okay, I don't know if it's the same rock or stone or same area, but that's the only mention of scribbling or drawing that we know of. And it does look like a little kid would be drawing this, right? But how can we know the handwriting? I think that's the hard part, unless there's some kind of code in this as well. I don't know if there's code. I mean, there's very clear words, right? If you clap once, it'll caw. If you blow a whistle, it flies. If you clap twice, it does a hop, whatever that is. Maybe this is short whistle, and this is a normal whistle. It'll fetch. Okay. Well, that was it for the contents in letter 3. I'm not sure if letter 4 is just a solution now. So do I have to come up with my theory? Let's go back to my notes. So as far as the whole Flora situation, we now know what happened, and I don't believe it was Flora. On that same note, I don't think it was Jarvis either. Again, I can't really fully clear these people. At least I know why they were lying. It seems like Edward was at the post, even though if he fell asleep, he was just there the whole time. Jane, we really can't clear either because we have no information on her. Same thing with Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins. There's no real mention of corroborating anyone else's alibi So yeah, I don't know how detailed I need to be at this point. Because my best theory is that Teddy's the one who knows how to instruct this bird how to do things. He's drawing birds. He was in the chapel on that day the inspector came by, maybe trying to clear up evidence. He did find a feather and put it in his hat though, so I don't know why he would tell the inspector about the feather. So when it comes back to motive, again, Sir Henry has definitely the strongest motive here. Not to mention this whole thing about wanting to have a reason to divorce his wife. We also know that someone has been putting something in his elixir or whatever he's drinking. But does that have anything to do with the missing finger? Okay, so again, this is my first time playing Dear Holmes, so I don't know if I'm supposed to have a full solution before I open the fourth letter. Let me look at that handwriting again and the drawings. So from the drawings, there's a boat. And is this a lighthouse? And then the bird here, I think it looks like it's carrying something, right? The reason why I'm looking at this is because in the three objectives that I need to solve, one of them is to find a location where it could be. So if we go back here, by what means did it make its departure? I'm still saying it's a bird. With the window broken, that makes it much easier for a bird to do it. And if it's Teddy, I really don't know a motivation other than, it's just worth a lot. In what undisclosed location might the sacred reliquary now lie? Somewhere where a bird can take it? I don't know. And then is Sir Henry's life, as he claims, in peril? Yes, because someone's putting something in his tonics, or what is it called? Oh, sarsaparilla. What is sarsaparilla? So it is used somewhat to treat some medical conditions, I think. Okay, so we didn't really have to piece that together. Watson kind of just told us that. Well, we don't know who has been doing that, but that's not the question. It just says, is his life in peril? Okay, well, I'd love to just noodle on this for a while, but I do not have the time. I think what I have is the best I can come up with at this point. I don't really know the motive if it is the page boy. Could the page boy be working with someone else? Could it have been someone else's handwriting on that paper? Let me take a quick look because I don't think we have much handwriting. No, I don't see handwriting. Another thing to note too is like how, this E is backwards. If this is supposed to say fetch, it's misspelled. He's putting capital letters here. And it is cut off here in the actual letter. So I can only guess this means short. And if this is supposed to be berries, and he gives berries as rewards, I don't know. He also misspelled it. So that just made me think too. The only other person who they're saying, is kind of not all there was the other doorman. Oh, not doorman, footman, sorry. So Edward is Lady Anne's, or is related to Lady Anne somehow. I forget how. And the only reason they hired him was because Lady Anne insisted. Obviously, we know why, because they're family. But there would be nothing linking him to any of this. Okay, I don't know. I think it's just time to go on to letter 4. All right, so I have the contents of letter 4 right here. It's 3 pages again, front and back. And it is indeed a letter from Sherlock to Watson. So this is most likely the solution. So let's see how much we got right or if we were completely off. So Sherlock is writing on the 8th, "My dear Watson, this has been an eventful series of days for all. By now, there is a chance the saint's finger might have already been found. Nevertheless, I am pleased to say that I have sorted this case out. Should the relic remain absent, I will of course include instructions on how best to proceed. However, first I shall provide you with a careful account of my method, for there was more than one mystery to be unraveled at Oakdale Manor." I think I mean Oakvale. My guess is that he started whistling and clapping and all that, and the bird came back or something. I don't know. There's even a bird up here. "From the moment I read Lady Bellamy's description of the saint's finger, I knew her case would be deceptively complex. Its disappearance from a locked room suggests a supernatural agency, especially in the minds of the younger servants. However, as men of science, we permit no mystical explanations. A historic silver reliquary decorated with a number of diamonds was obviously something worthy of a burglar's time. And while the supposed family curse might have frightened Sir Bellamy, such superstitions would likely fail to deter a thief. In fact, many of the sorts of collectors who would be keen to own such an object would consider its contentious nature a valuable feature. Lady Bellamy's missive contains several curious details which left me suspicious of a limited group of people, namely the Bellamys themselves and their two footmen, Jarvis and Edward. Based on the information provided by Lady Bellamy, she herself had suggested displaying the relic before it went missing. After learning this, one might wonder, was she trying to ensure that it would be taken? The information in the Bellamy's first letters indicated to me that this was unlikely but possible. Her interest in using the saint's finger to generate funds did seem sincere, and she did not hesitate before admitting that she had suggested it be displayed, but she could have simply offered up the confession as a blind. So basically, trying to cover up something. Moreover, Lady Bellamy could have been working in tandem with her cousin Edward, who seemed loyal to her personally rather than the estate. So that's what I was thinking. If Edward had something to do with it, then it would involve Lady Bellamy too. In her letter, she had neglected to mention he was her relative, only offering support for the young footman. Yet, if his associate Jarvis left him alone the evening the relic went missing, then he had the opportunity to retrieve it and conceal it. No, but you need the key, right? And there's only one key. He could have done this of his own accord or at Lady Bellamy's behest, I thought, but in either case, his modus operandi was still unclear, for it would have been nearly impossible for him to use the window without both harming himself in the process and being in cahoots with Jarvis, which seemed rather unlikely. On the other hand, there was Sir Bellamy, who was acting and reacting strangely in spite of the circumstances. The fact it was he who demanded the relic be displayed only in the chapel after opposing an exhibition in the first place was curious. Perhaps he actually wanted it to be displayed there to facilitate its theft, or he believed the place most holy would counteract the supposed curse. It was also suspiciously fortunate that he insisted on viewing the relic the morning after it disappeared, despite a lack of necessity. He could have orchestrated the event to feign innocence and sneakily absconded with the relic, especially if he enlisted the help of his footman Jarvis, as Inspector Mercer accused. This I thought was implausible unless both of the footmen were collaborating, which again seemed unlikely, as it would suggest a far more elaborate conspiracy than would be required for the Bellamys to steal their own relic. Still, there were moments unaccounted for that cast a suspicious light on Jarvis and Sir Bellamy. Lady Bellamy left the chapel with Edward upon discovering the saint's finger was absent, and he returned to the chapel before she did. On her return, she witnessed Jarvis's confession and Sir Bellamy subsequently berating the footman. Lady Bellamy could have missed a part of their conversation, which is to say, there was a possibility that Sir Bellamy was then conspiring with the footman. Though suspicious of him, I admit that the information in his letter, dated 5th of July, ultimately argued his innocence. Plainly speaking, had he orchestrated the theft of his relic, he would have left behind evidence suggesting a tangible culprit, and I doubt he would have wasted time lamenting nightmares and curses. Beyond this, Sir Bellamy's letter indicated to me that another mystery was at play. The fact his sarsaparilla has been making him sleepy of late was unusual, and especially alarming in light of the relic's overnight theft. So too was the man's fixation on the inspector, Andrew Mercer. Was Bellamy anxious because Mercer presented a threat he could sense but not perceive? Or was he simply upset with the man's methods of inquiry? Mercer's own letter, dated 6th of July, helped answer this question. To begin with, the inspector admitted he was familiar with Sir Bellamy since his childhood, and that he has known Lady Anne for years. He also had many saccharine words to say to her, though this itself proved nothing beyond familiarity between the two. Though I surmised a suspiciously close acquaintance between Lady Bellamy and the inspector, I did not believe Sir Bellamy was threatened by or even aware of it. He would have not confided his fears regarding the sarsaparilla to Inspector Mercer if this was the case. The inspector's letter also stated that Jarvis snuck away in the middle of the night when he ought to have been guarding the relic with Edward. Although Lady Bellamy had previously reported this, Mercer's account of his exchange with the footman was telling. Jarvis turned red in the face when his associate noted his unusually timed meal that evening, yet he had no problem admitting to, even defending his affinity for liquor. In other words, he was presumably bothered by Edward's anecdote, though not because of the fact he had been caught drinking. I predicted, accurately I should now say, that Edward's revelation would lead us to another secret of his, something involving the other servant, Flora. Per Mercer's letter, the butler had spotted her sneaking back into the manor on the night the relic went missing. He said she was drenched but oddly happy, clutching a croquet ball and a small rag. Of course, Flora provided an excuse for herself, claiming Mr. Jenkins had been mistaken about the evening in question, but she provided no evidence in support of her claim and could have easily been lying. If she had been lying, then it was worth noting that Jarvis's trip for bread and cheese that evening had been neatly aligned with her rainy stroll. In either case, Mr. Jenkins, I thought, was right. Flora sneaking in with the croquet ball in hand was a mighty unusual sight. Inspired by the butler's repeated complaints of missing braces, I hypothesized. Flora could have employed a small, expedient catapult to break the chapel's window that night, thereby aiding somebody, Jarvis, in the theft of the relic. This theory was quickly discarded, for Flora had many easier ways of accessing and stealing the saint's finger, and even if she had wished to steal it via the chapel window, why then would she have broken the window in such an elaborate way? She could have simply tossed a stone or the croquet ball she possessed at the time, rather than steal garments from somebody and engineer a catapult. While she could have been party to the crime, it seemed unlikely that she had anything to do with Mr. Jenkins' missing items. At this stage, I suspected she was harboring a secret relationship with Jarvis. That is exactly what I thought. But barring the existence of a fairly large conspiracy, I could not yet fathom how either of the pair could have succeeded in taking the saint's finger. More confusing still, Mercer's closing statements appear to implicate the Bellamys again. Oh man, is it Mercer? Is it Mercer and Lady Anne? Mercer's note concerning the relic's insurance gave a clear reason to believe Sir Bellamy, if not his latest wife, would have wanted the object gone. Sir Bellamy's sarsaparilla and his recently resulting sleepiness also presented an interesting development, especially when one considers the fact that he, but not his wife, reported the recurring issue. Now, if his tonic was indeed tampered with, either his wife had to have done it, or one of the servants did, after finding out where it was stored. This knowledge, the sarsaparilla's place of storage, could have been facilitated by either of the Bellamys, knowingly or not, which complicated the matter of identifying a culprit. Putting that aside, the timing and extent of Sir Bellamy's symptoms were unexpected. The tonic, if it was indeed poison, had been making the man drowsy for some days now, with no adverse effects beyond those of evening lethargy. It is perhaps admissible that Lady Bellamy might have drugged her husband, taken the key, crept out to the chapel, stolen the relic, and discreetly returned the key. However, to do so, she would have had to work with Edward and or avoid alerting the Mastiff. That's right, because the dog is there too. But I mean, the dog is familiar with her, right? So it wouldn't have been alarmed or barking or anything. She too would have risked encountering Jarvis, who is faithful to his master. One must also ask why, if she wished to steal the item, did she not do so in the previous years, when she could have removed it from its trunk and said nothing of it? Yeah, that's true, because you you have so much access to it, right? But then she would be the prime suspect if she stole it from the trunk, right? Therefore, my suspicion was that his somnolence, whether inflicted or imagined, was unrelated to the theft. I would suggest another reason for the altered tonic after reviewing your latest letter, Watson, but holding Mercer's letter alongside those from the Bellamys, I was compelled to agree with the inspector's last intuition. No person could have entered the chapel to take the relic. There were no secret passages through which to gain admittance, and the walls and roof were sound. The door's rusty hinges alone would have woken the Mastiff or Edward if someone had tried to force the portal open, and neither was roused until Jarvis returned that evening. The door's lock was not damaged, and the key to it never left Sir Henry's wrist. The conceit of someone hiding behind the tapestry is a clever one. I have done so many times myself. But as you yourself deduced, it would have been nigh impossible for that person to have made their leave without risking discovery. As an added measure of precaution, let us consider the potential culprits anyways. We know that both maids and the pageboy were present at breakfast, which the cook prepared, the morning the crime was discovered. This we know from Lady Bellamy, who witnessed them listening to her husband's recitation of his dream. Thus, none of them could have still been hiding in the chapel at the time. The butler Jenkins was unaccounted for, but his sheer girth makes it difficult for him to remain concealed behind a tapestry. Oh, I know he was tall, but is he also big? I also must dismiss the idea, the conspiracy that such a plan would necessitate. The servants have offered no serious grievances against their master, and any collusion among the servants or between Jarvis and the master would have required either Edward's help or his silence. Both are so unlikely that the theory may be safely dismissed. The robbery of the saint's finger, as demonstrated by the mounting evidence, was a complex issue, likely involving multiple individuals. And further complicating the case was the fact that several secretive relationships were undeniably at play within Oakvale, some with no apparent connection to the crime. It was your subsequent letter, Watson, that allowed me to discern the significance of these relationships and, in turn, their links, or lack thereof, to the crime. Okay, so I think, yeah, Flora and Jarvis are definitely linked, but probably not related to the crime. What I'm thinking now is if the page boy is linked to anybody. I don't really know because he could have been used, right? Was he used by the inspector? From its beginning, your report on 7th of July casts a different light upon several of our key individuals. Inspector Mercer, per his statements, seemed unusually invested in bringing justice forth for the sake of, specifically, Lady Bellamy. Oh my gosh, is it Inspector Mercer? He also presented a precise theory for the case, accusing Sir Bellamy and Jarvis of a plot against Lady Bellamy, based on limited evidence. His theory was admittedly intriguing, especially in light of the Saint's Finger's generous insurance policy. Still, Inspector Mercer's judgment appeared to be clouded by an affinity for Lady Bellamy, or as he could not help it put it, Annie. Yeah, I did notice he called her Annie. Then there was Sir Bellamy, who was definitely removed from my list of suspects by your diagnosis. The aged, ill, and anxious man was too unwell to have orchestrated this plot. I mean, you never know if he got help, right? He could have done it. So I turned again to the staff, and on reading the details of your conversation with the maids, this knotted mess finally loosened and began to unravel before me. Flora's confession, I posit, was an honest account of the truth, save for one detail, for which she bears no responsibility, and therein lies the solution to this case. Flora and Jarvis's secret is but romance, and although Flora believes it to be true, she did not shatter the window to the chapel. Aha! So it was Teddy, because Teddy is the one who found the ball, right? Teddy, the page boy, and I should say the specter behind the stolen relic, did. So it was him. He then exploited a serendipitous late-night opportunity to pass along the blame to an unwitting Flora. Oh my gosh, did I get it? Well, I didn't put together that he could have been the one to throw the ball at the window. But it makes more sense to have been the one to kind of do that, as in you're controlling that versus hoping that something would have happened to the window, like if it was part of his plan, because it wouldn't make sense for him to not have that figured out. Her exchange with Teddy and the drawing you found leaving the manor suggested that the young page boy was at the heart of this inexplicable robbery. My theory was only strengthened when I recognized a number of the details in your letter and the ones previously sent by Inspector Mercer and the Bellamys, with this thought in mind. Teddy the page boy without a doubt took the saint's finger, and he did not work alone. To put it briefly, the clever chap dispatched his familiar, a magpie I wager, to fly through the chapel's broken window and retrieve the saint's finger. One might wonder, but what would possess a page boy to commit a crime so grand and greedy? Yes, that is my question still. To that, I say one should look towards Teddy's ailing mother, meager finances, and recently rejected request for a wage adjustment. Okay, so it is just going to be money at the end of the day. The boy hoped to abscond with the relic and obtain a sum with which he could comfortably care for his family. His plan had not likely been developed past take the treasure until learning of the reward for the relic, which you will recall elicited a positive reaction from the boy. As for his methods, they were most easy to understand after examining the page found outside of Oakvale. I'm certain that the drawings and writing were Teddy's imaginings for two reasons. First, although an adult might have conceivably misspelt words such as berry or whistle, the childish drawings and penmanship suggest a more youthful, if not whimsical, author. Yeah, that's exactly what the conclusions I came to. Second, Teddy was seen several times not only scribbling away outdoors, but also feeding the local birds. That's exactly what I pointed out. that he was spotted scribbling on a pad? I am therefore inclined to believe that the writing on that page was a record of the page boy and his magpie's training regimen. And in light of Teddy's penchant for crafting tools, such as his detecting device, I am further inclined to believe the boy fashioned a catapult, as I had initially speculated, out of Mr. Jenkins' braces. Oh, okay, so he did need the braces to do that. That's true too, because he was with Mr. Jenkins in the kitchen, I believe, on that night. So that could have been when he stole them. Well, I don't know if he was with Mr. Jenkins, but he was in the kitchen and then left at the same time Mr. Jenkins retired. So yeah, he could have easily stolen them. With this elementary tool, he shattered the window, allowing entry to his avian accomplice, who he then commanded to fetch whatever object he might have used to break it, along with the saint's finger itself. Shortly after this, as he prepared to make his leave, he heard Flora and Jarvis's commotion in the clearing behind the chapel. Fearing somebody would witness him that evening, he hid and waited. When he saw Flora, he took advantage of the opportunity and slyly delivered an explanation for the broken window, one that would absolve him of guilt and eventually even convince Flora that she would be held responsible for the theft. Later on, Mercer spotted the boy eagerly aiding a feather to his cap, which he was certainly recovering from the site of his crime. I was saying though, why would he show off the feather? Because he found it. He's like, I found this feather, and he put it in his hat, right? That's what immediately tipped me off that a bird could be involved. So he should have kept it a secret. Now, I will return to our dear page boy, but beyond his plot to steal the saint's finger and Flora and Jarvis's quiet dalliance, there's been another drama unfolding before our eyes, Watson. Your last letter to me concluded with the revelation that a small percentage of laudanum had been detected in Sir Bellamy's bottle of Ayer's sarsaparilla. In this case, I will say that Sir Bellamy was being sound of judgment. I am confident that Lady Bellamy has been tampering with his tonic, though only as a means of deflecting the man's obsession with a true heir. Oh, considering that she had access to the sarsaparilla and successfully adding laudanum to it, one must question her intent. She had the opportunity to kill her husband had she wanted to, so it is more likely that her goal was to sedate the man, as she accomplished, and altogether disable his advances. Knowing too that his health is already failing, I would not be surprised if Lady Bellamy is less than patiently awaiting the man's demise. Indeed, she may be doing so whilst she pursues a new beau in the inspector. For his part, Inspector Mercer's willingness to investigate the sarsaparilla and openly speak of it indicated his innocence to me. In spite of his affinity for Lady Bellamy, he seems unaware of her ploy. Know that I have sent word to my own colleagues at the Surrey Constabulary, and Chief Hastings has agreed to call on Oakville Manor tomorrow. He'll question Lady Bellamy and Inspector Andrew Mercer himself and apprise the Bellamys of what I have told you in this letter. He will also address the laudanum and ensure that there is no other cause for alarm insofar as threats to Sir Bellamy's health. Last, as a means of addressing the page boy's recent crimes, he has been so gracious as to agree to a proposition I devised. For this, I will need your assistance. If Teddy has not already found and offered up the saint's finger in exchange for the reward, then I suggest locating the boy and informing him that the situation has turned so dire that Sir Bellamy is offering £500 and that you would like to enlist his help in scouring the property again. Then simply leave the boy to his devices. I assure you that he will, by pure chance, surely happen upon the relic. Once he has done so, or alternatively, if he does not produce the relic, you must confront him with the fact that you are aware of his scheme and present him with two options. Number 1, you will deliver him to his mother and summon Chief Hastings so that the constabulary and she may determine an appropriate course of action. Or he will cease work as Sir Bellamy's page boy and agree to a new position in London. Your observation was spot on, Watson. The boy would make an excellent irregular. He would appreciate, even benefit from, having his capabilities acknowledged and encouraged, and we can find much more productive uses for his keen wit than Sir Bellamy or Jenkins will at Oakville. Explain to him what this might entail and what it would require of him. I suspect he will be somewhat thrilled. Inform him, too, that I will guarantee a salary with which he can provide adequate care to his mother, and that Mrs. Hudson has kindly agreed to introduce them to her acquaintance, Mrs. Esmeralda Emerson. Mrs. Emerson is known to offer assistance to those less fortunate and would be willing to offer them lodgings free of charge for some months, and later for an exceedingly affordable fee. I expect that Teddy will be rather amenable to this plan, but please do keep me informed of his response regardless of its nature. For now, I must finish my meal here, then imitate the magpie and quickly fly away. Another mystery glitters before me in Canterbury, and it requires my full attention. Very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes, Consulting Detective. All right, well, I think I pretty much got it, right? There might have been some little minor details that I missed, but for the most part, I got it right. Let me know in the comments down below if you guys also got it right. Leave a comment as well if you want to recommend any games for me to play. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like, and if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to help support me in the channel, there's a QR code right here or a link in the description to buy me a coffee. Any amount definitely helps out. So yeah, that's it, and hope to see you in the next video.